Hello and welcome back to the Activation Phase podcast. I'm Tim. I'm with JP.
Today we're talking about the Picts. So, what do you know about the Picts, Tim?
Yeah. So I think this episode is going to be mainly you talking because I basically know nothing about the Picts. The one thing I do know is that they're kind of like Scottish or Irish. I don't know.
I'm not familiar enough, but they are generally in the geographical area which is now considered Scotland.
Right.
Whether or not it's the same people, I'm not willing to say. I think that's up for debate. But I just think about that area. I think probably one of the worst movies ever created by mankind was created by the Picts with what's her face, Keira Knightley, being some Pictish lady. So that's a terrible movie. So it's basically this warband is much better than that movie.
Right.
So kicking it off, like let's maybe move away from that. Anyway, so I think we'll start off by talking a little bit about the flavor of the Picts. So why should you play this faction? In my mind, this is a faction that really rewards being familiar with the terrain rules and being able to set up the board to really take advantage of this particular battle board. It's a battle board where I think the majority of the advanced activations actually depend on conditionals, like, for example, whether or not you're within terrain, starting close to terrain, and kind of manipulating terrain itself. So it really helps you if you read the few pages on terrain as well and familiarize yourself with that before you pick up this board. It's an interesting board because you both have a decent shooting. You can fight in melee, and you're also incredibly quick even if you're on foot. I think they're one of the quickest factions, especially with foot. And I would have to say they're quite similar also to the playstyle of maybe like a pagan peoples, like if we compare it to a different age. So it's generally shooty, a lot of movement, and a lot of terrain.
It's crazy. I've never seen a faction that has that many like advanced abilities that just really depend on terrain. Like you can't use half the abilities if you don't have difficult terrain.
Yeah, so I think maybe one way of boosting that in your favor or tipping that in your favor is we can talk about in the selection of the warband itself with mercenaries. But let's maybe start off with just the equipment options themselves. So I think that's where it starts getting quite interesting anyway. So one of the main draws of taking the Picts is that you can mount your warlord on a chariot. So your warlord on a chariot, he has javelins, he has an armor of 4 in both in melee and in shooting, so he's quite vulnerable. And he goes from 8 attack dice down to 5 in melee and 4 in shooting. So right now it doesn't sound particularly good. However, there's some bonuses. First, it's the model itself is pretty cool. So it's
Epic.
It's unique. So you just kind of ride around in style. So even if the rules were bad, I would take it. The second is that it counts all uneven and dangerous terrain as being impassable. So you do lose a little bit of mobility. You can't enter a building. You can't give it a war banner. However, okay, we're coming to the positives. The we obey is L instead of S. So actually, that's the only good part.
No, and it's not the only good part. You look amazing.
Yes. Okay. It's a flashy ride. But I think it really helps you anyway. So you can boost up the shooting as well with some of the abilities. So I think it kind of evens out in the end. And just having the extra range for We Obey is great, especially because this warband tends to spread out quite a lot. You don't have to take it. You can also just be a standard, boring warlord on foot, like a peasant. And there you just have melee, the standard melee loadout for warlord. Your hearth guards can be mounted on horses, and then they have javelins, or they can just be on foot with no special equipment. Same thing with the warriors; they can only be on foot with no special equipment. And then your levies is where you have a crazy amount of choice. So you can have javelins, you can have bows, or you can have crossbows. However, you're limited to one single unit with crossbows. It's pretty amazing. I would also say that a single unit with crossbows is kind of an auto include for pretty much.
They're so good.
Yeah, just take as standard. That's the equipment options out of the way. However, the Picts don't actually have any old friend new enemies options, so you're kind of stuck with your Picts. You can't play them as something else, but the models are very interchangeable, especially if you don't care too much about the historical accuracy, that you can use them for Scots, for example. And manufacturers like Footsore actually just advertise their Picts and their Scots ranges as being one and the same. So
Yeah.
I don't feel too bad about doing that myself. You obviously have to switch out some of the options, but it's not that much of a not that different from the Scots. And you also use the same dice, so that helps.
You can also use them for the Irish as well, right? I feel
yeah,
like
I think yeah, I think there maybe the equipment options are a little bit different overall because you're probably taking more slings and stuff like that. But I think you'll be able to reuse a significant chunk of your collection.
Yeah.
I think, like before, we're going to pick out just a few of the battleboard abilities, just to give you a little bit of an idea of how you play this board. We're not going to go through everything. You might notice that my energy levels and my enthusiasm is a little bit lower than for the Goth battleboard. But I do think they have a lot of potential, and I think they're also very strong. So I think the standout ability for this board is Scouts. So it's ability that where you can use all 3 dice facings. It's played in the activation phase. So you activate a unit to move. Or if you use the rare facing, you activate 2 units to move. Their move is L for this activation, and it cannot be reduced in any way. So, for example, by fatigue, terrain, etc. One stipulation is in one of the scenarios, I think they explicitly say you can't, like the frozen river or something does affect it, but I think that's really just the only exception. However, back to the ability, these units may not activate the shoot until the end of the turn. So there was a little bit of confusion about that, I think, unwarranted. It's just you can't, if you activate the units to move with Scouts, you just can't activate them to shoot until your next turn. So no ifs, no buts. The main thing here is the first rare that I just put on here because it essentially you can move your levies for very cheap. Put them in position, especially on the first turn. Obviously, you can't shoot with them, but you can move them L and place them into a piece of terrain that you've positioned strategically to cover all of the board, especially if you're talking about the crossbows or something. It's also just great because you can run away. You can't use, or your opponent can't use the fatigue to slow them down. So any kind of, for example, in the Limes campaign, it really helps you get across the board and to the board edge. So that makes it pretty interesting. And it's just, yeah, it's just an all-round great ability. One thing is it is a move, so you can't use it to charge. So that's one downside.
But I mean, Scouts doesn't say you can't activate a unit for a charge after you made this move, right? So you can still use Swift as the Wind, which takes a uncommon or rare die. You can activate a unit for a charge or move, and if it ends the activation with an S of an uneven or dangerous terrain, the activation generates no fatigue. I mean, you can go really really far if you wanted to, and just screw a unit up. I think it's really good.
Definitely. It's hard to defend against something like this because you can't, as the opponent, you can't use fatigue. You have literally they can move across any terrain without any issue. So you can't really do anything. So it's pretty powerful, especially with that combo. So that's a very nice follow on. So yes, great. You can use it to charge, or you can also use it to kind of retreat. For example, if you're having your Hearthguard with javelins, you move up one, you shoot, and then you run them away again. So it's pretty legit. The only stipulation, obviously, is that if you are using this to charge, you do have to make sure that your the unit that you're charging is within S of uneven
Yeah.
or dangerous terrain. So that makes it a little bit more difficult, and people can play around with that a little bit. But if you've done your terrain placement properly, there should be relatively little area where this is actually relevant. So I think my third favorite one is the secret ways, which is a little bit of a strange one. It's an activation reaction, and it requires an uncommon dice. So trigger this ability when a non-mercenary unit is targeted of a charge or shooting attack, but before the activation is resolved. Once the melee or shooting attack has been resolved, remove all the figures in the unit and put them back anywhere entirely within very short of uneven terrain and more than M away from all enemy units.
So weird.
It's pretty weird.
Yeah.
But just to talk a little bit about the potential, I think maybe we can say, first of all, this is not something you can do with an objective. Uh, you can't teleport away with an objective, so don't think about that. If you check the Book of Battles, it's disallowed. Don't even try it. But you can do a lot of tricks with it. Essentially, you can move across the board. You can position your unit to capture other objectives in terms of like was it controlling territory, or for example desecration. If you get charged, you can kind of put your unit across the board next to a marker to destroy it. So it really means that there's nowhere on the board where it's safe. You do have to be more than M away from enemy units, so that limits it a little bit. But even, for example, with the pagan peoples, they have a similar ability where you can transport a unit. Obviously, they don't have to be charged, so that's kind of one downside. But it's pretty easy to get a unit, especially if they're relatively small, to put it down somewhere within very short of uneven terrain. So you don't even have to be inside the terrain; you just kind of have to be close to it. So yeah, this opens up the board a lot, and it also means that, for example, if you want to put your Hearthguard in Danger's way, and then just use some of the abilities further down the board to protect them a little bit, and then also close ranks, you should be okay, and most of them should survive, and it might be worth it just to get that unit across the board. So I think it's very difficult to defend against as well, and just having a dice on this particular ability as a deterrent also works, because either you have to go in and be pretty confident that you're going to destroy the unit completely, otherwise it means that this unit is going to be somewhere your back of the field or next to an objective or something else, and then you're going to have to deal with it again. So it's a little bit of a psychological little mind game that you can play with people as well, just to leave the ability on there.
It's really cool.
And it's also very unusual ability, so I don't think there's any other one quite like it, except especially in Age of Invasions. I mean, the only one I can think about is the pagan people one.
Yeah.
And then finally, my favorite one, or second favorite, would be called is called Stalking. So this is a common and a uncommon dice. So it's a shooting ability. If your unit is within S of an uneven or dangerous terrain, gain 3 attack dice. So combine this with some crossbows, and it's going to be a bad time. There's nothing else to say there.
That's like, it. Just it. Yeah.
Yep. You understand. It's nice and simple. It's very powerful. However, it also means that little units of Hearthguard, like a 4-pack of mounted Hearthguard with javelins, they can also gain the 3 attack dice. So it makes them quite potent as well. It really increases that, just the power of any one of those types of units. Because normally, for Hearthguard with javelins, okay, you get 4 shooting dice. Like, it's nice, but it's not going to change anything most of the time. However, if you add an extra 3, you're starting to get a little bit worried as the opponent if you see this coming towards you. Or it makes your unit choice very flexible, and it makes them quite powerful.
I think one other very, very interesting ability, just for me, maybe you don't agree, is Feint. It's a melee ability for a uncommon or common die. If the enemy unit has more than 6 attack dice, you get +1 bonus to your defense dice. Otherwise, gain 3 attack dice. I think it's very interesting because you kind of can force your enemy,
Yeah.
like your opponents, to close ranks. On warriors, for example, if they're 8 or on a 6-pack of Hearthguard, they will make you generate more attack dice if they close ranks, and I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's also really nice to combine with secret ways just to make sure that your
For sure,
unit
yeah, for sure.
does get wiped out by some crazy combo, right? Because you can close ranks, so you're already saving on a 4+.
Yeah.
And then normally if someone tries to attack your Hearthguard, they'll have more than six attack dice. Otherwise, they're doing something wrong. And then you're essentially saving on 3s, which is it's pretty good odds. So that's a very nice combo as well with the secret ways to make sure that if you do get charged, you actually have a unit to teleport and you don't get completely wiped. So yeah, I think the rest of the abilities are also pretty good. I don't think there's any abilities here that are like really terrible. The only ones that are a little bit difficult to get off are Frenzy and Sacred Tattoo, simply because they take up 2 dice each.
Yeah.
So I haven't played those as many times, simply because I think either an extra move or being able to play another ability, even if it's not the most optimal one, is just so much better than using 2 dice on these abilities.
Especially where Frenzy costs like 1 uncommon and 1 rare. That's just super expensive.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not a big fan of two dice abilities. For me,
Yeah.
they just tend to be a little bit much, especially in scenarios where you have other stuff to do, you know?
Yeah.
So that makes it a little bit difficult. But yeah, it's like, they're definitely not bad abilities.
It's a good board. I really like it. I haven't played them yet, but I'll definitely pull out my Irish and play them as Picts, I think.
Yeah, it's solid. I mean, they have some really good defensive abilities, even though they're relatively lightly armored in terms
Yeah.
of having Hearthguard with javelins, for example, or your even your warlord. So that's pretty solid. So they kind of all round really good. You can get away with playing them all on foot. You can get away with having more of them mounted. It's pretty flexible, and I think we'll see Picts doing quite well overall. It's a pretty straightforward board once you get the terrain down. So maybe let's talk a little bit about army composition. I'm gonna start off by saying, okay, just take the warlord on chariot. It's cool. There's not a lot of chances to take it. Maybe when I say the rest of the composition, you'll see why. So I do really like 2 points of Hearthguard. Depending on your opponent, you can either have them on foot, and then in a more melee option, or you can have them mounted with javelins. Both are totally legitimate, depending on your opponent. I also like 2 points of warriors just because they're solid. Like, you can't go wrong with just warrior dudes. Especially they move really quickly with scouts. They get in position. It's not like you're stuck with some really slow units. And then after that, I think 1 unit of crossbows or one unit of levy with crossbow is a must.
You gotta, yeah.
And then a unit with I think javelins are also pretty great. You can kind of put them in both aggressive role, or you can hide them in some terrain and then shoot at people. So I think those 2 ones are pretty legitimate. However, I think the levy with javelins can probably be switched out relatively well by a mercenary unit. The interesting mercenary unit is called Guides. So it's 1 point, 8 figures, and it's 8 warriors equipped with javelins. So the Guides know their homelands like the back of their hands. So in any scenario where the scenery isn't determined by the scenario, Guides allow the player to choose between the following after the table is set up, but before deployment: to add a small piece of low uneven terrain more than S from any other piece of terrain, to move a piece of terrain up to M anywhere more than S from another piece of terrain, or to remove a small piece of terrain. So obviously you're not going to be removing the small piece of terrain. You're either going to be adding or moving a piece of terrain around just to optimize it for your warband. and they don't suffer any movement penalties in uneven terrain. So that's pretty good as well. So that's I think that's a very interesting option instead of taking the levy with javelins. So you've got a nice uh, well-rounded warband, and then also you have a little bit of control in terms of if your opponent is trying to reduce the amount of terrain on the board, you can kind of be guaranteed that you get an extra piece somewhere on the board. So I think that's a pretty legitimate way of using mercenaries as well.
I feel like leaving 1 point of levies at home and taking another points of just normal warriors might also work. Because I think with this battle board, a 12 pack of warriors is quite really good because you can activate one unit for a very long charge without fatigue. You can have secret ways on them so they can just teleport away to another very important fight later on. Feint works really good on them to have the bonus for your attack dice if the enemy really wants to kill them. So I think they're also really good.
Yeah, I don't think you get wrong. There's many wrong options with this warband. You
Right.
can use everything. It's not like one act. Any of the abilities is specifically for Hearthguard or specifically
Yeah.
for Levy. So it's very flexible. And the main conditional criteria which you have to meet is just the terrain. So as long as you have that one nailed down, then you're good. I think you can make shooty units very resilient with the feint, or you can make melee units pretty brutal and quick with some of the other abilities. So it really allows you to kind of cover all your weak spots and make your strengths even stronger. So maybe one last note on the model options. I think you're looking at the models generally going off the illustrations and the general vibe of what Picts are supposed to look like. Some barefoot,
Barefoot, that's it. Yeah.
barefoot, hairy dudes in like the long pajamas.
Yeah.
That seems to be the general vibe. So
And like stone chainmail from the Romans.
yeah, limited amount of gear,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think personally I have the footsore Scots / Picts models, since they have the entire range in terms of levy with crossbows, javelins, just normal levies, and then normal warriors with just no special equipment, and then your Hearthguard, both mounted and on foot. So it covers everything. The only thing Footsore doesn't have at the moment is the chariot, but I'm just using the gripping beast one, and it's fine. So
Those
that's
are metal minis, right?
yeah, they're all metal minis. I know you're allergic to metal minis.
Yeah.
Gripping Beast has recently released
Yes.
the plastic Picts. I haven't seen the full sprue yet, but they do include the crossbow.
Yes, there's
So
one crossbow per sprue, so you can't quite build a whole, like with one box, you can't quite build a whole unit of levies with crossbows, but with 2 boxes, you'll be fine.
yeah, because I think you'll normally be picking up 2 boxes anyway, so you'll have enough for your unit, and then probably you're missing out on 1 or 2, and then just give them like a stick or something.
Yeah.
just deal with it, okay?
And then there's also the like from Wargames Atlantic, the Dark Age Irish. I think they work well as well. They're not they're not perfect, but if you like very fine plastic, then those are probably your best bet.
Yeah, I think they have the sling options as well, right?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
You're pretty well covered there. So I think either of those boxes, and they're relatively interchangeable,
Yeah.
from what I've seen. So you've got the plastic side covered as well, and then I guess you just mix and match a little bit if you want mounted models with the Dark Age Cavalry kit, and then
Or
add
maybe
in
even
some
the Dark Age Goth kit, the Goth Gallery.
yeah.
If you give them other hats, I think they would work well as Hearthguard horses.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can probably get away with a lot because they're relatively lightly armored in terms of having just the javelins. So just give them a helmet. Don't worry about the chainmail. It's fine. So I think you can get away with a pretty cheap warband that looks decent. So I think that makes it kind of an all-round good warband. You can either go all foot and just keep it nice and simple, go the plastic route, and you're basically sorted with about 50 euros. So
Yeah.
always a good time. And then you can use them as Scots as well. So win-win.
Dude, I'm gonna start collecting Picts. I'm gonna start playing Picts because I already have like Scots and Irish. So damn, really cool.
What's stopping you? What's stopping you?
Yeah. I never look at the board, and you've kind of convinced me here.
Yeah, this podcast is getting pretty expensive because every time we look at a board, we're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
maybe we
Oh
should buy
yeah.
it.
Got it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then suddenly 3 elephants appear in the mail.
Yeah. I do have 3 elephants next to me right now for the for the Sassnets.
Ah, okay. Imagine my surprise. All right. That was all for today. Thank you very much for listening to the Activation Phase podcast, and we will be covering the hunts of all people in the next episode. Thank you.
Yes, this is gonna be my episode. Yes, thank you. Goodbye.